Till the final phase of blast from the Enterprise. But that's Tomlinson on the floor.
Greetings and felicitations.
Hip hip hoorah, tally ho.
Okay, lately, as many of our listeners know, we've been watching these episodes with a group of friends. So let's find out what our initial reactions were after this episode. And we had some really deep Star Trek geeks with us. In fact, one of them, Mark Naccarato, he's the producer of the Star Trek fan production, The Romulan War. So he has a lot of insight on Romulan. So he had a lot to say, and it was wonderful to get his insight on this first appearance of the Romulans in the Star Trek series.
It was great talking to him, and we just had, such a wonderful discussion that night. And I don't think it was all recorded, right? But we just
we got quite
went
a few.
On and on.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. He could talk forever about Romulans. So let's tune in.
This is Kavora, and once again, I love this episode. It was one of my favorites. I guess the thing that I noticed this time is a lot more of like Janice Rand, because you think she's just a background character, and then you don't realize how much she was actually in this. She just appeared, and like she wasn't really necessary for the plot, but it was still interesting to see her there in very serious situations. But I do like how the Romulan commander was so much like Kirk. I think, and that was the reason to show the Romulan ship and their crew, to see how the parallels, how they were like the Enterprise crew. They didn't want war either, but no one on the Enterprise actually knew that.
This is Joseph. I thought, considering that this is the original series, this episode was pretty good. A very intriguing plot line. I think we should be suspicious right about now how much the Romulan subcommander looked suspiciously like Spock's father. It's it's just, it's almost, it almost can't be a coincidence. It's just.
Well, it's just that they came from the same gene pool, those, right?
This is Nayar. This is one of my favorite episodes. I often say that this is an episode who people have never seen Star Trek should watch, because it does have a lot of military intrigue. It's well-paced. It also gives us a new character, or a new series of characters, the Romulans, but also it establishes some background as well. Background is with regards to the Romulans did have some impacted with doings with the Federation of Planets, or pre-Federation era.
This is Mark. Balance of Terror is one of my favorite classic Star Trek episodes. I think it has a lot of suspense, a lot of action. It's very much modeled. It feels like a feature film for a TV episode in its structure. If they had wanted, they almost ape some of the big beats for Wrath of Khan, and that sort of submarine chase and the two dueling starship commanders. And I like that they it's good because you have conflict between Spock and Styles. Right, and there's this sort of underpinning of bigotry, which is a theme that Star Trek has always gone back to and has always used as a teachable moment for fans and for audiences. I like that. Interesting. I hadn't noticed this before, but this is from a technical perspective. One of the only times I remember them using phasers in proximity blast. So their phasers were not in a solid beam like we always see them. They were more like torpedoes or bursts of phaser energy that explode. And I don't remember seeing that anywhere else in any of the series. Unless you count like the Defiant in Deep Space Nine, which fires sort of like, pulse phaser blasts. That's a little nerd action there. But I like the remastered version, was what we watched. They did a really good job on showing the sort of the panels on the hull plating of the Bird of Prey, which makes it look a lot more modern, makes it more realistic. And again, I like all the story beats, and I like that there was some stakes. They set up the wedding at the beginning with two characters we didn't really know, and yet we kind of got attached to them because we cut back to them once or twice. And then there's a sense of loss, like the Enterprise crew does lose somebody in this fight that we actually cared about. So I think Balance of Terror is, I would put this, if I was going to say, if you've never watched the original series before and you're only going to watch 3 episodes or 4 episodes or whatever, you've got to put Balance of Terror on that list. And it's one of my favorites.
So now we got to jump ahead and ask you a little bit more questions because some of our listeners might recognize your voice, Mark Naccarato, the producer of the Romulan War Star Trek fan production. It's a production that you have that takes place in the Enterprise era, so we're talking roughly 100 years before the original series. How have you used your story that you developed for that independent fan production? How have you used some of the lines from this episode and reflected it in your work?
Well, when Spock gives the history lesson of the Romulans, by the way, I still have a clear memory of watching that scene when I was about 10 years old at my grandparents' house. Mm-hmm. We would watch old Star Trek, when it was syndicated. So I remember that scene. That was very influential to me. So, but you hear a lot of, this is what we know about the Romulans, is that the war between Earth and the Romulan Empire. And that is, in fact, the whole setting of my film, The Romulan War. So one of the things that we took from it was we obeyed the canon that they lay out, mm-hmm. which was there was no face-to-face contact. And you have to understand, too, that Spock may not, one of the things that we assume is that no human or Romulan knows what the other one looks like. Well, as far as you know. So who's to say that during the Romulan War that humans and Romulans did see each other, and that the humans just didn't survive. So
that's a good point.
We or that their identity was known but covered up. Mm-hmm. Okay, mm-hmm. And because if you just think it through, the Federation was not quite formed yet, mm-hmm. and if the connection between the Romulans and the Vulcans was understood and known at that time, perhaps that would have jeopardized relations between the humans and the Vulcans. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, we touch on some of that. We do reference that nuclear weapons were used. There's nuclear weapons used in the Romulan War by both sides. Initially by the Romulans, but the humans use nuclear weapons as well. So we do stick to a lot of what was laid out and play within that and expand within that was used in the episode.
Now, being a huge Enterprise fan, what have you noticed about this episode that was used in the Enterprise TV show?
It doesn't seem to be, we saw the Romulans, I want to say 4 times on Enterprise. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that was consistent was the humans never did get to see what they looked like. Mm-hmm. So that was consistent. Enterprise obeyed the canon in that regard. And there was a time where Archer communicates There was a time where Archer communicates with the Romulans in the episode Minefield, but it is just by radio. It's audio. It's not through visuals.
What do you think about ship design?
You could, I think you're looking at a 60s aesthetic with both the Enterprise and the Bird of Prey that we see in Balance of Terror. And then in Enterprise, you're not looking at a 60s aesthetic. You're looking at a modern aesthetic. The NX class Enterprise certainly looks more contemporary than what we would see in the future, but yet in the real life past, the Enterprise. I've said this before. I am a big fan of the ship design in Enterprise. I like the Bird of Prey that Drexler designed. And of course, the NX-01 is one of my favorite starships.
Now, right now, we are looking at the Bird of Prey that you gifted us, and we're talking about ship design, Doug Drexler. Tell us a little bit about it and why this does make sense.
Well, it shares the twin nacelles that we saw in the Kirk era.
So we're talking about the Enterprise Bird of Prey that we're holding
yes,
in front of
yeah,
us.
the Enterprise era Bird of Prey, which is a green tint. It shares that the basic shape in the twin nacelles, and then that center primary section. It has its weapons mounted on the front, just like the Kirk era ship does. And it does have the Bird of Prey painted. It has indications or markings, Aztecing, whatever you want to call it, of the bird on the Enterprise era ship, just like I wouldn't say just like, but similar to. Oh, see on the underside, the underside of the.
I'm looking at the magazine right now, and the magazine shows makes references towards the original
Romulans.
Yeah, oh, it's like that. Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, that bird, the orange and red warbird painting markings, we use that we had Samuel Cockings. Sam designed a new ship for us for our film called the Stormbird, and it too has the warbird markings underneath. So
I think it's wonderful when we look at what this particular episode did, how it springboarded the Romulans. Going forward, we loved how they developed in The Next Generation. And then now we're looking historically backwards at Enterprise, and we're seeing, wow, there still was that Bird of Prey marking. So they made a homage to the original series, but they tweaked it just enough to make it its own. But this is where it all began. I mean, I love looking at the roots of the Romulans. I can't imagine what it was like to be in 1966 and seeing this episode and having this much suspense over a new race of characters, and who knew that they would become so popular decades later.
Right. Well, yeah, the Romulans were a critical main adversary in The Next Generation for Picard and company over and over again. And less so on Deep Space Nine, less so on Voyager. But on Next Generation, the Romulans were critical. I would say, probably the most influential villains until the appearance of the Borg. And they were well done. One thing that's interesting about this episode is it's somewhat controversial. It's somewhat controversial is that Scotty mentions that the Romulan ship that they're pursuing runs on simple impulse, and people have inferred that to mean that the Romulans did not have warp capabilities. And which also leads them to believe that back during the Romulan War, 100 years earlier, that the Romulans also did not have warp drive, which
How could that be?
Which they do because Archer encounters the Romulans, and we see the Romulans use. And so people have attacked Enterprise for, quote, violating canon, because they're inferring that the Romulans could not have had warp drive, even though the humans did. And the Vulcans, and the Andorians, and everybody has had warp drive at that time. But I think that's an incorrect assumption. I think you cannot infer that the Romulans did not have warp drive, whether it's the 2260s or the 2150s. They only, the way Scotty says it, means that this ship in particular is only capable of simple impulse. And I believe that is the case. First of all, we're assuming Scotty's analysis is correct, okay? And second of all, it could simply be that ship, which was a prototype weapon that had a super plasma weapon that could destroy an entire planetoid. I don't know that you see that. You don't see, that wouldn't necessarily be the standard for every ship. It was dispatched by the Praetor to destroy the Earth outposts. It was an overpowered prototype, and it had cloaking technology, which Spock mentions has a big draw on power. And so what you have is a ship that, if it did not have the state-of-the-art cloaking device and did not have its super plasma weapon, probably is going to be able to do warp speeds. And it may not have ever anticipated running into another Starfleet ship and found itself outmatched. So I don't necessarily buy that the Romulans don't have warp drive. Just that ship doesn't have warp drive.
If I may ask some questions, is there anything in canon that gives us an indication as far as the distance between? Any indication in canon that tells us the distance between the planet Romulus and the Romulan neutral zone?
I know there have been there have been maps drawn up, but I don't know. I mean, like, those are not really canon, but there's well, like that, yeah. But yeah, there's stuff in okay, yeah, reference books, and they actually do have distances. They do have distances in them. But what I wanted to say about warp drive, because I looked this up one time, and I probably need to look again, but I think they said, starting with the Next Generation, that the Romulans use a quantum singularity. They really don't have warp drive. They do have faster than light capability, but it's not warp drive. It's something else.
So, I would
about the quantum singularity. Because
that's all I can say.
Yes,
right.
that was the standard for the TNG era.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That at least in the TNG era, that's what they used. But if Scott said that the ship in Balance and Terror only used impulse, which is presumably slower than light travel, then that ship would have had to have traveled for a very long time, presumably across many light years. And if you think about it, the actual closest star to Earth, other than the Sun, is just over 4 light years. Mm-hmm. So it literally takes 4 years from our Sun to reach Proxima Centauri. So if this warship only had impulse, then how would it have been practical to have even, crossed into the neutral zone, entered Federation space, and not only that, but also destroyed multiple outposts within a matter of days? Maybe they were in the same system, but I'm not sure why they would be. If you're monitoring a neutral zone that's maybe tens, hundreds, maybe thousands of light years in length, so it just doesn't quite add up to me.
I think that your reasoning makes sense.
So here's the thing: is okay. So as someone, as a writer, I have to try and make a round peg fit in a square hole. So you can, first of all, if something that you haven't seen or haven't heard about is not canon. The only things that are canon are things that are mentioned or seen on screen. So I can give a couple responses to what you just said. I can give you hypotheticals. Like if we were retconning this, you make a good point, right? First of all, the Romulan ship is not necessarily trying to get back to Romulus under simple impulse. It is trying to get back into safe space, which is the other side of the neutral zone. Presumably, once it crosses the neutral zone, there will be border defenses by the Romulans to prevent Kirk and Starfleet from crossing their side. And they're safe. You know, they're sort of safe once they get on their side of the fence of the neutral zone.
Go by that map that was shown.
Yes.
We saw the Federation defense line, correct? But we're assuming that the Federation doesn't know if there's any Romulan defense line beyond the neutral zone, correct?
For all, what we know is on our side of the neutral zone, there are 8 outposts on asteroids.
Yes.
What is on the other side of the Romulan side of the neutral zone? Neutral zone by default means it's demilitarized and there's nothing there. So on the other side of the Romulan neutral zone,
they could have outposts of their own, right?
yes, they could have other outposts or a fleet or both on the other side. It could be a heavily militarized side of the neutral zone. So they only need to cross the neutral zone. Like they're assuming Enterprise won't chase them break the treaty and chase them through the neutral zone. They're getting back from the Fed side, crossing the neutral zone, then getting to their side, which is presumably they will be saved. And they talk a little bit about we want to go back to Romulus, but that's in the abstract. After they get to their space, they could jump on, they can refuel. Now here's the other thing to think about too, to address your other point about how does a slower, and you're right, impulse speed is slower than FTL. And when we hear warp drive in Star Trek, that's shorthand for FTL. So whether it's with dilithium crystals or a quantum singularity, warp drive is like slang for FTL. And other sci-fi franchises all say FTL. Star Trek, light speed. Hyperspace is what Star Wars uses. And so here's the other thing that could be possible. Who's to say, again, it's not violating canon if you haven't seen it, who's to say that the bird of prey we see in Balance of Terror is a prototype ship that's overpowered, that is dispatched to destroy the outposts along the neutral zone, but returns to a carrier ship? Who's to say that it is not based and released from a carrier 3 or 4 times its size? Okay.
Because we saw massive Romulan ships in Next Generation.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's been brought up in novels too. There's one, I think it was The Final Frontier, that said that there's a huge mothership that the Romulans have that releases the smaller ships that are the warships. Do you want to say anything else? Or?
Grapple with the carrier ship concept.
Yes, it's quite interesting. Of course, at this time, not much is known particularly about the Romulans in the 23rd century, but I'm curious as to whether there's canon evidence as to whether such a carrier even existed.
No. There's no canon evidence whatsoever. There's none that is. But, again, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means it's the same way that, is the Constitution-class starship the only class starship in Starfleet in the 23rd century?
Well, why would
In the original series, we only ever...
The Daedalus class, was that still in effect? It's
mentioned. Yes, the Daedalus class is mentioned in the TNG episode and talks about a crew that crashed there 100 years ago, which would have been approximately around the time of Kirk and Spock.
It also appears to be And the Soyuz class appears to be in service at around that time as well.
Soyuz?
Yes.
You're correct. That's Captain Bateman's.
Yes.
But yeah, there's no evidence that there was a carrier ship. I'm just putting that forward as a possibility. If I was to write a novel or a comic or do a fan film, and I put that a carrier ship dropped off that bird of prey, which was super powerful and sent on a special singular mission to destroy those asteroids and report back on the other side of the neutral zone to its carrier ship, I would not be violating canon. You might not like it. You might think that's bullcrap, but I would not be wrong. Because unless somebody in another episode, like episode 70, says the Romulans don't have carrier ships, I'm not violating canon. Okay? They have to come out and say that, or we have to see some evidence that there can't be. And that was that's one of the things that's always bothered me a little bit about the criticisms of Enterprise. When Enterprise came out, it got a lot of criticism for quote-unquote violating canon. And it really didn't. Enterprise didn't violate canon. It told you about stuff you didn't know was true.
And we just didn't like it.
And you may have liked it, you may not have, but don't say it's a violation of canon, right? Yeah. You can not like something and just take it on that theory, but it's not a violation of canon. So Enterprise took a lot of punches for that, and Discovery gets a lot of beatdowns for it, though Discovery does actually violate some canon. Most of the canon violations Discovery has are visual, right? Like how the alien, like the Klingons, and yes, it's visual canon. Which, me personally, I give a lot of leeway on visual canon.
I believe that was absurd. Discovery's origin of tribbles, that was absurd.
Perhaps I'm trying to remember now. Is
the short tracks? Did you watch the short
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
But anyway, we're deviating. I love that theory, and that's one of the things that we both love about the Romulans is because the Romulan episodes, they tell us something, but they're always open-ended. You're like, right. I wonder what. They're still so mysterious.
So, any information on how wide the neutral zone is? Is it several light years wide?
Did they say it in the episode?
They just showed a visual graphic of it, but no, there was a visual graphic that almost looked like a river.
That was well.
Not to scale.
I assume that what looked like a river was probably just showing you the border. I don't think that was that narrow line supposed to be the neutral zone, or just I thought it was just the border of it. There, okay.
That means that there's that empty space, right? That
no man's land.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. The empty space part was probably the neutral zone, but there has been mention, and maybe it's just in the books. I don't remember if it was in canon. Excuse me, but there has been mention of planets that are in the neutral zone. There's some non-aligned planets there. That I know I've heard of that. I just don't remember if that was in canon or not. But.
Do you know?
This is like a weak point. I feel like wasn't Star Trek V. It starts off on a planet like where they're having the peace conference, and I feel like that planet was in the neutral zone because the Romulans. I can't remember though. That like Star Trek V is a film I like try to forget. So Nimbus, I think the name of the planet was. So I could be wrong, but that may have been one of the planets that existed in the neutral zone. But there was a Klingon neutral zone too, at one point.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's what. Star Trek has kind of made the Romulans and Klingons similar because, like, the Romulans just had the cloaking device, and then later it was the Klingons that had the cloaking device. And the same thing, the neutral zone. Yeah, and the neutral zone was originally designed to be a Romulan neutral zone between the Federation and the Romulans, but later there was a Klingon neutral zone that was between Federation space and the Klingon space. So yeah, they've kind of crossed over those races in those ways.
So what about the Devron system then? Was that not in the neutral zone as well?
When was that mentioned?
All good things.
Ah.
I don't know if it's in the neutral zone. You could be right, but I believe it was in Romulan space. And I should mention that the Devron system is a locale in the Romulan War. And a shameless self-promotion. And you'll be interested in what happens there connects to what we see of the Devron system in The Next Generation when it's mentioned in the final episode.
But I want to say that also there are neutral planets. Like they may not say it's in the neutral zone, but they'll just say this is a neutral planet. That might make some people, in their minds, they're thinking that's in the neutral zone, but maybe they didn't really say it was the neutral zone.
Well, what's interesting is that there are neutral planets in Federation space.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? The Federation says, here's our sphere of influence, here's where we've explored, here's where we have colonies, here's where we have member worlds, and it just so happens there's a habitable sentient race living on a habitable planet. Inside that, it's in Federation space, but because the Federation are not conquerors, and they leave it be, they're just a non-aligned planet in Federation space.
Yes.
And frequently you have seen plots where Starfleet has to ride to the rescue of a planet that's kind of in their space or in their sphere of influence, but which are not members. So,
and that's different from a neutral zone.
Yes, that is different. Yes.
But you can't have a neutral planet in the neutral zone.
I would think that all the
Federation planet in a neutral zone, correct?
I would think all the planets in the neutral zone, if they're habitable, are by default not aligned with either the Federation or the Romulans.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Are you looking for something? What are you doing?
The map. We're almost at the map.
Oh, you're looking for the map. Yeah. Okay. I mean, you can look at it online too.
By that way, that map, the map you're going to queue up, that design aesthetic. Yeah. Like the way the grid is and the font, that's the design aesthetic I use for my my computer graphics. Oh, so wow. So it looks familiar to everybody.
Okay, so here we go.
Yeah, like those fonts and everything.
Oh, and they do let you know that the planets are Romulus and Romi because the other planet never really gets mentioned until Nemesis.
Right, and that's another thing too. So. Romi is a different planet than Remus.
All right, so let's talk about that.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I think it is.
Okay, so we just pulled up the map from the original series, so let's talk about it.
It looks like there's a scale there.
What you mean? This is the neutral zone right there. This is Romulan space. That's
so let's look at the scale. Okay, so here's the scale.
5,000.
So is that 6,000?
Just generic enough for you not to understand it. Yeah, 5,000.
Okay, so that's 5,000. So this 1, 2, 3 spaces is 5,000. What? It doesn't. We don't know. 5,000. It just is 5,000.
Right.
In this grid. So we were to sit. This might be.
It's 2.5, really. 2.5.
So 2.5. What? Whatever that.
Oh, and that's much narrower. Yeah. So there's probably not much space.
It can't be miles.
There is a unit of measurement. I have to go back and look at. I wish I had my Star Trek Star Charts book. Which I would recommend for everybody who's a super nerd.
We have it. We got to break that out.
It's a great book. I love that book.
So let's talk about this.
Though it's not canon. It is as close as you can get to canon. But there's a unit of measurement called a parsec. So perhaps this is a parsec-wide zone.
But a parsec is over 3 light years.
A parsec is 3 light. Is that what the charts in the Star Trek book say?
It's an astronomical unit.
Okay.
It's real. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, not in Star Wars. It's not. in Star Wars, it's a unit of time. Remember?
Yes.
Yeah.
The Kessel Run.
Yeah. So, but nobody's ever accused Star Wars of scientific accuracy. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's ever referred to how wide the neutrals. And keep in mind too, and this is always a struggle to realize, is it comes this way. It comes out from your screen because space is three-dimensional, right? Yeah. So look how close Rami and Romulus are. Yes. Are they really close? I mean, are they? Because what if Romulus exists on your TV screen and Rami is on the other side of that room? You wouldn't know because we're looking at it from two dimensions. Mm-hmm. So it's always weird. I figured this out the hard way because I had to make 3D maps for the Romulan War. We do these maps that start like this and then turn so you can see the three dimensions. So you can look at planets like Earth appears to be really close to Andoria. And yet, the humans are in space for 100 years before they meet the Andorians. Why? I mean, they look really close. But are they? Because all we ever see is the flat 2D map where there are two dots next to each other. What we don't know is that Andoria could be coming out towards us, okay, a block away from where the map on the z-axis, right? Or behind it. It could be going the other way. So, in fact, I mean, when you look at like how close Earth is, well, we can't see it on this map, but they've shown maps where Earth appears to be close to Romulus. And why didn't the Klingons, why didn't the Klingons just launch an attack on Earth? Well, they look close on the 2D map, but you don't really know until you see it as a 3D map. And so that's one of the things that's always interesting too is these maps that we see on TNG, DS9, all these until Discovery got the technology to show them in three dimensions, which Pike comments he hates and makes them all go back to the flat screen again. Right. It was brilliant writing right there, and because it explains why all the other ships don't want to use it. But that's the thing is these maps are deceptive in showing you how things are close to each other and others are not. Because you're only looking at it in the two dimensions. I mean, different topic than what we were talking about, but
yeah. I mean, I would also think the neutral zone size could change too over time, because the Romulans might. Well, you would think they wouldn't go there and try to colonize a planet if it's the neutral zone, but maybe they did, if they had the chance. Or
well, I thought that the purpose of the monitoring stations was to monitor and make sure they're not doing anything.
Right, you would think, but the Romulans just destroyed some too. Right. So, so they could have. I mean, or some of there could be non-aligned planets there that are inhabited that decided to go with the Federation or the Romulans.
Okay, so I pulled out two maps. I got the star charts.
They actually, there's the 22nd century map.
Well, didn't that just say Romulan Empire or what?
Here it is.
Romulan. Oh, that's see. They just got that from this one, though.
Okay, but
does it say how big it is?
Okay, so let's talk about this. So, the Star Trek star charts, written and illustrated by Jeffrey Mandel.
Yeah, he was a showrunner, I think, for the second season.
All right, so let's compare the star chart to what we see on screen. So the neutral zone was established 2160.
Right.
According to the star chart.
Yep. And I would assume that Enterprise in this episode is not even on this map that we're looking at in the book. It's probably up here somewhere.
Okay, so it's
farther away.
Farther.
Well,
just looking at the curve of it. There is a wider map that shows there is another map that shows where the star bases are. Where the
hold on.
It's Cardassian. That's TNG time.
It's this way.
Further back.
Yep.
Delta. See, this is all delta, gamma. Here it is.
Mm-hmm. It's this. This shows you the outposts. I think they're right.
Okay, so according to this map, the Romulan Star Empire, egg-shaped, right? Yeah. So these are all Federation outposts that we see.
Here's number 1, right? Is that it?
Romulus and where's Romulus and Remi on here?
Romulus and Remus are up here.
There it is. There's Rami, Remus. See,
And Romulus? Do they have
lists
3 planets?
Yes, it lists Romulus, Remus, and Rami.
Wait a minute, they're saying Romulus and Remus are one planet?
Well, they orbit each other, right? So it would be like if
okay.
Remus was our moon.
Oh, okay.
It's not a moon.
They're just
Yeah.
so close together. Yeah.
But there's Rami below it, just like it is on. So it's matching.
So look at maybe this little circle is the orbit of Remus going around.
Okay, on the original series, we see the red dot that says Romulus, and we're assuming that circle around it, that yellow circle is Remus.
No, I was just throwing that out.
That would violate canon because Remus does orbit a star, and it's gravitationally locked, so that it always faces this. One side always faces its parent star.
Yes.
But it's in that system. It's in the Romulus home system. I mean, we saw it. It was on camera. In fact, in Nemesis, Remus, we pull back from Romulus and see Remus. So it is more like our moon than, say, Mars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And by the way, in the Romulan War, there's a whole plot line about what's going on with the Remans at this time, and it's critical to the war.
Oh, come over here, baby doll. Check this out. Look at this. So this book that we're looking at, Star Charts, it maps out, look at that, the route of the Romulan bird of prey, 2266. From Balance of Terror.
Yep.
It's according to this map.
They even drew the grid in there.
Yes, they're saying that it started at Romulus, and it wrapped around, past the border, looped up, and then came back down.
Well, yeah, because it destroyed the 8th outpost, and then 2, 3, and 4. Right?
So that matches up awesome. Mm-hmm. I mean, they did a good job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mandel. Like I said, Mandel knows he was one of their. I believe he was one of their showrunner in the second season.
And they're saying that Charon is right next to Romulus.
Well, that's a 22nd. That's a 24th century map there.
What Charon? I mean,
the planet with the half black, half white people, right?
Yes, but Charon was also the final battle of the Romulan War. And it's unclear as to whether those were the same planet.
Oh, okay.
Because we have a Charon spelled differently in our own solar system.
Okay.
So it's possible Charon that with the half black, half white people is not necessarily the same planet as where the last battle of the Romulan War was fought.
Excellent.
Maps, trust me, I have read this book 3 or 4 times. I'm a nerd for the Star Trek maps book. I love it.
Yeah. They did an excellent job of piecing together what we see on screen and putting it all together. Okay, so let's see what Bijo Trimble's entry in the Star Trek Concordance has to say about the Balance of Terror.
Written by Paul Schneider, directed by Vince McAveety, Stardate 1709, aired on December 15th, 1966. Kirk is about to officiate at the wedding of Angela Martine and Robert Tomlinson when the Romulans attack Outpost 4, which guards the neutral zone between Federation and Romulan territory. The Romulans use an invisible screen and a new weapon, photon torpedoes, to destroy Outpost 4 as they have Outposts 1, 3, and 8, then head for home with the Enterprise in pursuit. While making them invisible, the screen makes it nearly impossible for them to detect anything outside the ship, so the Romulans aren't sure if the blip following them is an enemy ship or a harmless echo. The Terrans pick up a picture of the Romulan bridge and learn that the Romulans are of Vulcan descent, which makes Lieutenant Stiles, whose forebears fought in the Romulan War, very suspicious of Spock. The Romulan commander, a man of great character and honor, attempts to shake off the Enterprise, but is forced to turn and fight. Both ships sustain damage. The Romulan ship is low on fuel, and the Enterprise has lost most of its phaser power. A leak in the phaser coolant system poisons the air, disabling Tomlinson and Stiles, who are manning the one remaining phaser. Spock fires the phaser manually and rescues Stiles. Tomlinson dies. Stiles survives and overcomes his bigotry toward Vulcans. The Romulan ship is disabled, and its commander, rather than submit to capture, salutes Kirk as an honored enemy and destroys his own ship.
Well, there's a lot to this episode. As you can tell by our discussion when we initially viewed it with our friends. When I first saw it as a child, I saw this and I thought it was awesome because I knew this was an iconic alien race.
Yeah, definitely. This was the introduction of the Romulans. And, I kind of remember thinking, like my first time seeing it, I must have been too young to really get it at first. I didn't really get the politics.
Same for me too, totally.
Yeah, I appreciated it more when I saw it later on when I was just, a little bit older, like a teenager, and then really getting the nuances and how deep it was.
Yes. Yep, totally agree. I was the same way. And I know that I saw Mark Leonard portray Spock's father before I saw him as a Romulan commander. So I was kind of perplexed, too, of, okay, why is this guy look like Spock's father, a Romulan?
Well, yeah, but, they even did his hair the same way.
That's what I'm saying. Pointed ears. There's certain actors that can use multiple roles. Just Jeffrey Combs is a perfect example.
Yeah, but his alien makeup was so distinct with each of the roles he played.
Exactly.
And so they get Mark Leonard to come back and play like the same physical type of alien.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as a kid, I found that perplexing. As an adult, I find it strange. Why? Why would you? I don't quite understand why. Was there a lack of actors available?
Actually,
strange.
Well, when I was reading about this one, there actually was a concern about the budget, and doing the makeup and the costumes for the Romulans was a concern. So I kind of think they must have kept Mark Leonard's ears.
Oh, that's a good point.
They had to be molded just for him, so it was easier to bring him back to play Sarah, the same actor. Oh, he needs pointed ears. We'll just get the same actor. It must have been a budget concern. And the same thing with Decius, too, because the actor that played him came back for a mock time, so they could just use the same ears for him.
Well, did he have ears in that episode? Because I know for the budget
that's right.
For the budget
that's
concerns,
right.
they created helmets because they didn't want to make ears for everyone.
Oh, that's
right?
true. That is true, yes. So he didn't have the ears in this one, even though it was the same actor. But
now him, I didn't notice as a kid. I didn't notice that was the same.
Yeah, it wasn't as obvious, right?
Yeah, whereas Mark Leonard, I did, and Mark Leonard was the first actor I ever saw at a Star Trek convention. So
oh, really? That's right. You said that. Yeah.
1986. I'm always going to love Mark Leonard for that, and this was during the day when it wasn't. You just got in line and you met the actor, you shook his hand, you got an autograph, he said a couple words to you. It wasn't the mega production that it is today. And you grew up in that era of conventions where the actors had time to be personable.
Yeah, because I got his autograph back at a time when I didn't have to pay for autographs,
Mm-hmm.
and he was nice. Yeah, I had a picture of him holding a cat, which I found out later it was his daughter's cat. But yeah, I got that picture signed, and he said, "Oh, you're a cat lover too." I said, "Yes." Yeah, it was great. He was really nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I remember meeting him, and he misspelled my name.
Aw. Okay, well, it happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this is interesting when you look into the origins of the episode. Now, the writer,
Paul Schneider,
he ended up writing The Squire of Gothos. He wrote for the animated series, The Territon Incident. He also wrote for Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, $6 Million Man. So he had some other TV credits after Star Trek. But
That's interesting. Yeah, so he was a good writer. And he is the one who created the Romulans.
yes,
And even though now this script he wrote actually went through a lot of changes, but
a whole lot of changes.
But the Romulans are still there, and I think his essence of it still came through.
Yes, and we're going to talk about the changes later on when we discuss the Blish adaptation, because that's an adaptation where we saw much different than the
Yes.
final product. But with regard to his influences, he even admitted to Harlan Ellison that there was a movie, one key movie that was used as a influence was a 1957 movie, The Enemy Below, and that was a World War II epic with the Americans versus the Germans.
Yes.
And it was a naval movie. And watching it from a Star Trek fan's viewpoint, you see more of the influence than just watching a standard war movie. Such as one of the books that someone was reading in his bunk was The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. And we know that the Romulans were based on the Roman Empire.
Yes, that was intentional.
Yes. And we see the verbiage used for their military rankings.
The centurion, and they have a praetor they
Yes.
mentioned.
Yes. So that is a strong influence. And as you watch the movie with Balance of Terror in mind, and you see the zigzagging, with the submarine, with making sound on the submarine, knowing that the other ship could hear that, there's no doubt about it that was a strong influence. Another movie that was influenced, another naval movie, Run Silent, Run Deep.
So we did watch it, and you could see certain plot similarities in that one too. Like throwing out the trash,
Yes.
the body in the trash, and
and both of these movies, you see that they were very competent crews. They were fighting for their belief system, and each captain really respected the other captain. And I think that's the underlying theme of this episode of Balance of Terror.
that they wanted to show that both commanders really are patriots. They're both fighting for their countries. They're both doing what they think is right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like when you think about it, there isn't really a bad guy.
Yes.
In that respect. And the idea of having a neutral zone, I understand, was also based on, because in the 60s, there was a demilitarized zone between North and South Vietnam. And that idea was based on that. Gene wanted to put that in. So it comes from a lot of different, war stories that we've known.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the things I love about original series Star Trek, is that each episode has a different feel. Some are courtroom dramas with a little sci-fi twist in it. Some are war dramas with a sci-fi twist to it. Some are exploration dramas with a little science fiction twist into it. The original series kind of had that format of mixing things up.
Yeah, because they could do episodes about so many different things. I mean, that was the advantage of being episodic instead of serialized like a lot of shows now. And they had at one time discussed making a few words of a Romulan language for this episode, but then they decided not to because they just didn't have the time. And they said like they didn't think NBC would want to. They wouldn't go along with having subtitles on the screen for whatever the Romulans were saying, so they just said, well, we'll just have the Romulans speak English.
And that's amazing to think that this early on, they were even toying with the idea of having another language.
Yeah, I mean, they did make up, a few words for Vulcans, like the Tal Shaya and Plomeek soup. So they had a few things, but they didn't really have Klingon words in any episode either. And yeah,
even with Vulcans, it was strictly words, not necessarily a language developed. We wouldn't get the language developed for Klingons until the motion picture and beyond.
Right. They finally decided to do it. And the episode shows how war can take its toll on people. I mean, that was part of the idea of having the wedding, just to show that, I mean, these are people with lives, but then they get interrupted, you know, because war happens.
And I think that was wonderful to use that as the beginning of the episode, because we have two characters that we don't know anything about. But by the end, we really feel for the tragedy.
Yes, we do. And it was the framing story, because in the end it showed her crying and being consoled because she had lost her fiancé.
And this is an instance, oftentimes it's misunderstood that there's no religious beliefs and that everyone is an atheist in the future. Now, this is an example of, she was, based on her demeanor at the end of the episode, we could assume she was Roman Catholic. As she was praying, the kneeling. So the future of that Gene Roddenberry promotes is not one of no faith, but more so, if you choose not to have a faith, that's okay. If you choose to have a faith, that's okay. You know, it follows that theme of IDIC.
Exactly, and that's why they had that chapel. That room there didn't have any decorations. It didn't have anything that symbolized any one religion. It was just a general room.
I think they called it a chapel because of the fact that since it was a multi-purpose room, you could call it anything that you wanted to. So we could assume that any faith that was practicing there, you could call it whatever you want.
Well, and I think the military, they do have a chapel. They call it that.
Yes, right? They call it that, yes. That room in real life was a redress. Because
they reuse sets, yeah.
Star Trek Trivia.
Question number 1. What Earth Outpost section is displayed on the view screen at the beginning of the episode? Question number 2. What is the name of the Romulan who gets demoted 2 steps in rank?
I did like so many aspects of this. This is one of the episodes that I say if you've never seen Star Trek before and you want to see the original series, this is a great starter episode.
It is, because it's sort of indicative of what a lot of Star Trek is like. I mean, the social commentary about bigotry and about war, and the fact that it shows the Enterprise and the crew doing their duties aboard the bridge and the ship.
Yes, you're seeing everybody working together in some way, shape, or form. That everyone has a responsibility that they take seriously. It was extremely disturbing, the bigotry there. But then you see how Captain Kirk just shuts it down. So the idea that Gene Roddenberry wanted a perfect utopian future, he was hoping that hundreds of years from now there would be no bigotry, but unfortunately it's still a struggle with some people, and this was expressed in this episode.
This showed that there can still be some racism even among Starfleet people, and with Styles. Well, he said it. He said his ancestor was in the Romulan Wars, so he feels like he has history with these people. He has a reason to hate them in his mind. So, and the way that it was brought up in the episode, I mean, the way the whole thing was written was wonderful. The way we get to see the Romulans, when we see them and see their interactions, the way they talk to each other. And it's really the same thing that was going on the Enterprise. Mm-hmm. You have the commander that questions himself. And he has the one who gives him advice, the Centurion, the way McCoy gave advice to Kirk. Mm-hmm. And then the other person, Decius, the Romulan, was a lot like Styles, the one who was a little more gung-ho and, let's fight this out.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to know, in this episode, we don't know the Romulan commander's name.
Right, which became a thing because when the next time they showed a Romulan commander, we didn't know her name either.
Yes.
But that is interesting too. And the fact that this, so this Romulan commander, destroyed his ship in this episode. Mm-hmm. So of course there could be no other, he couldn't come back for anything else. But it would be interesting if there were any stories written about him or something.
Yes. And Mark Leonard said this is one of his favorite roles ever on TV. was playing the Romulan commander.
Because it was a very complex character, and it's a shame that it had to be a one-shot. I know I have to say this, it's so funny. I know there was one book about a parallel universe where they had this Romulan commander, and it's the same one because they mentioned that he looks like Sarek. But there was a funny scene in this story where, someone sees the Romulan commander, and they don't know who it is, but then they see Sarek, and they go, "Oh, I just saw you." And Sarek goes, "No, you didn't just see me." And so there's another Vulcan that says, "Oh, so I guess all Vulcans look the same to you."
It's interesting to note that when the remastered editions of Star Trek started being released in 2006, this was the first episode to be aired on TV, because they did make some major adjustments for the remastering. The most obvious being the Romulan bird of prey.
Right, because this one had all those visual effects in space, and that's just what most of the remastering was the visual space effects.
Yes,
the
it wasn't
ships
just
and
cleaning things
phasers
up.
And
Yes, you had to make some adjustments, and we as a group watched the remastered version, and it is so beautiful on the big screen to see the Romulan bird of prey in all its glory, because the original version was much smaller. It was, we know that it's a physical model.
And
that
you
was
could
lost
tell it
within
was
time.
a model. Yeah.
Whereas now I'm not always a big fan of remastering or changing things. This is a step in the right direction. But for them to present that first remastered one to the general public on national TV, I think just reinforces that this is a great starter episode for Star Trek.
And even the original effects, they were still very good, and they were actually very high quality for the time. And that was another reason that this episode actually went over budget. I mean, because I always thought of it as a bottle episode, which means it takes place aboard the ship, but they still had those visual effects that really cost a lot of money at the time. And
Yes.
and even in doing the Romulan costumes in those scenes, those things combined just put this episode over budget, but it turned out to be worth it, definitely.
Now let's talk about our viewing it as an adult compared to as children. So we both agree when we saw it as kids, we were just excited that they were Romulans.
Yeah. I mean, well, we only got to see them twice on the original.
Yes. Whereas now, this is a rewatchable episode because there's so much minutia to it. The dialogue is gripping. I think this is much better to watch as an adult than it was to watch as a kid.
Yes. And the thing is, because I've heard someone make a comment about how Star Trek was cool as a kid, and when he got older, it wasn't as cool. And I was thinking, I found it to be just the opposite.
Totally the opposite. I got more into it.
Yeah,
and
when
from
you're
middle
more
school
mature
on, I was really into Star Trek.
Yeah, when you're more mature, then you realize all the things you didn't see as a kid about how great the stories really are.
That's what it was. I understood it better.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And the real world parallels. And when we look at the original World War II movies that influenced this episode, those movies showed, one of them, The Enemy Below, that there was a young man that lost his fingers. And the captain said, well, we'll have to ship you back then. You'll go back into your civilian life. And he says, but I was a watchmaker. I'll never be able to make watches again. So that reinforced the losses of war, the casualties of war.
Yes.
Not just the bodies that died, but there's injuries. There's we know about PTSD. This was showing that, wow, this is. They would like to. Both of these captains honored each other, and they both said they would, possibly become friends in another time frame or in another scope. But it just reinforces the total casualties of war, and it made you think on that level, because that's what the original movies did. It showed the human lives that were affected by it. And what did you think about the Romulans' decision to not be captured?
For the sake of the story, I think the the Romulans had to destroy themselves to make it more tragic. Mm-hmm. So, and it's like, so this way the Enterprise goes home and just reports, well, the whole thing is over. Mm-hmm. I mean, because there could have been more repercussions if the Romulans could have been taken prisoner. So they just wanted it to end right. It's a clean ending if they destroyed themselves.
Yeah. Great episode. And this whet our appetite for wanting more Romulans in the future.
Star Trek Trivia. Question number 1. What Earth Outpost section is displayed on the view screen at the beginning of the episode? Answer: Z6. Question number 2. What is the name of the Romulan who gets demoted 2 steps in rank? Answer: Decius.
All right, let's talk about the James Blish adaptation. Oftentimes, the adaptations are based on earlier scripts. Sometimes the scripts have little tweaks. Some have big ones. What did you think about this adaptation?
This one seemed like it was from a much earlier script that was very different.
Very much so. Let's talk about it.
Well, I know I read that originally the outpost, like the the outpost names or the numbers, like it was a 4-digit number. It was 2024, mm-hmm. which is what was in this Blish story. Mm-hmm. Because they simplified it in the final cut, right? They were just, the numbers were 1 through 8 instead of having 4-digit numbers for each one. I mean, that's a very obvious thing, but of course we get into more. There are more differences too. Like most of the complete lines were different. Yes. Everything they said was different in it.
Yes. So this is one that we recommend everyone get the James Blish adaptation, read this one to see an alternate take on it. What could have been very different, especially the married couple.
Yes.
They end up getting married at the end.
Yeah, and this one they actually, it wasn't at the beginning that, they started the, and in this one they were going to start the ceremony. Kirk didn't even get to say a word of the ceremony before they were interrupted. But then in the middle of the story, he did marry the 2 people, but then in the end the guy still died.
But that's just so wild though, like why would it be in the middle, right?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that just, I thought it was I don't know, was it a strange pace? Like why would he do that? Why would he stop everything, marry them?
Well, when I was reading about the making of this episode, I think it fits just because they were thinking, let's make it a very human story.
Okay.
So it just made sense that they, we're still going to show that people can still live out their lives in the middle of this, whole battle going on. So let's go ahead and get married. I mean, I think that is what they were thinking originally.
I like the TV show version better. When you're on red alert, you've got to put aside things like that.
Right.
Like
what they
wedding
did.
Ceremonies.
Yeah. So what they changed it to in the episode was just having Tomlinson and Martine just talk to each other when she said, "I'm going to marry you, mister."
Which totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. And isn't that one of the lines?
That's what I said to you one time before we got married.
That's
right.
And the verbiage that was used for the wedding ceremony.
Yes.
Right? In the TV show?
Mm-hmm.
What did we do with that verbiage?
We put it in our wedding. Because we wrote our vows and had everything, written out.
Yeah. We had Star Trek wedding, so obviously we had to use Balance of Terror as one of the references to the numerous weddings in Star Trek. Because this is not the first time we see a wedding in Star Trek. It's going to happen more and more.
Right.
Let's talk about Styles. His character in the James Blish adaptation.
I mean, he was still a bigot. Mm-hmm. He was pretty much the same, wasn't he?
I thought it was more so in the book.
Well, the thing is, I mean, everybody was more so in the book. That was another problem I had. Why the book said that Scotty and McCoy hate Spock. And
yes.
Like,
yes. And that was part of the theme. Okay, so it almost seemed like everyone was ganging up on Spock.
Yeah.
Because Scotty hated Spock. McCoy hated Spock. Now we know in the show, McCoy does not hate Spock. He loves Spock. That banter that they have back and forth.
That's due to respect. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, they're friends.
Right.
Me and Jamie goof on each other constantly. That's what friends do. But, so I think just adding this so-called hatred with Styles, it makes it seem like there were a bunch of people that were anti-Spock.
Yeah, and that, I don't know why it was in the book, because I think by this episode that kind of thing should not be there. I thought Kirk, Spock, and McCoy were all friends by this time. This was like the, 7th or 9th episode or something.
But we know that this is early stages. They're still world building. And they have so many people involved throwing ideas around. This is probably one of the ideas.
And even the fact that they called Spock a Vulcanite instead of saying Vulcan,
Yeah.
that was weird too.
So we know that Gene Roddenberry is known for doing rewrites and tweaking things. Later on in Next Generation, writers just couldn't take it anymore. Right? He was kind of overdoing it. But I'm glad that there were some rewrites to this script.
I think the final version was better, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But now one thing that was good about, though, because you know how the Blish story started out, it started talking about the Romulans, and that was an interesting page about the Romulans at the very beginning.
Yes, I did like that, because now, we watching the show already know about the Romulans, but this just added more to them.
Yes, and this actually stated more clearly, more explicitly that they are an offshoot of the Vulcans.
Yes.
I mean, because on the episode, Spock just said he kind of theorized that they were.
Yes.
But Blish kind of said, yes, they are.
Yes. Which is great. This is why we have to do both. We do 3 things. We watch the episode. We try and find as much information about original scripts, background productions, and the Blish novelization or adaptation helps us to appreciate the early ideas of the script, and then we try to find any comic book references too. And then we get a better picture of the episode through all these resources.
It does help. It all flows together and enhances everything. Mm-hmm. Now another thing about the Blish story, though, he left out all the scenes on the Romulan ship, which I thought was blasphemous. I mean, those scenes were important.
They were. The Blish adaptations, and we've been saying this for a long time, they're just quick reads. They're not simply adaptations, but they are compressions of the episode. If you were to compress something, I'd rather have things compressed from the Enterprise, not on the Romulan ship. Because the Romulan ship is so unique. We want to know more about the Romulans.
Right. I mean, that's what I'm saying, right? Yeah, so you should not have let
those
parts.
That was a fault. That was a big fault.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. I mean, and then really it changed the meaning of the story, because, I mean, because when we see the Romulans and we see how similar they are to the Enterprise crew, and so this story did not have that at all. So that,
yes.
I mean, so it gives you a completely different take on the story.
I have yet to meet someone that's read the adaptations before watching the show, but I wonder what it would be like if you read the adaptation and then saw the show. Would you be disappointed with the show? Because some are virtually the same, just shorter versions. This one came across much more different than the final product.
Yeah, this one, I think someone would have a different impression of it. Well, I mean, yeah, if someone if they read this story and had never seen Star Trek, didn't know who Spock was, and didn't know what we know about the relationship with Spock and the other characters.
Yes, that's a point. One thing I do, and we didn't mention it before, is what I love about the Romulan ship is that it's so different from the Enterprise. It feels more like a submarine. With the periscope, with the viewports, with everything looked different.
That was intentional.
Yes.
And it looked cramped too.
Yes.
The Enterprise bridge is spacious, and so when you're looking at the Romulan ship and they're all in that cramped space, and they had and like you were saying, the center part that looks like a periscope.
Whereas in Next Generation era Romulans, they abandoned that idea. it looked more like a standard bridge that we're used to.
Yeah, they changed it on the Next Generation. Well, and of course the Romulans were completely different. Their uniforms,
yes.
and they had the foreheads. All that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it was a fun read.
It was, because, I mean, it's actually more fun to read one that's not exactly the same.
100% I agree with that. I want an alternate version. I hope to get a version that gives me more information. And sometimes we do get that. Not necessarily different information, conflicting information, but I want something more fleshed out. And sometimes the James Blish novels do that.
Yeah, sometimes you'll read something and go, oh, really? Yeah.
This is Mark Naccarato, creator of The Romulan War, a Star Trek fan production. The Romulan War is set in the Prime Trek universe in the 22nd century during the era of Captain Archer and the NX-01 Enterprise. Our film covers the war between Earth and the Romulan Empire, the key historical event which leads to the creation of the United Federation of Planets. For complete info on our film and all the other story content, visit our website at www.theromulanwar.com. Jolan True.
The good thing about this Romulan story, Balance of Terror, is that it spawned numerous novels, right? Or
because
based on these characters.
The Romulans became so popular, yes.
But we didn't see a lot of them on screen. And so we base a lot of what we know about them, the original series era, on the novels and the comic books. So just quick, fast, let's talk about some of the novels.
Diane Duane wrote her series of Romulan novels. I mean, they're the most popular.
Without a doubt. And it started out one novel.
My Enemy, My Ally.
That was the first one. And then a sequel came out of it.
The Romulan Way.
Yes. And then going forward, the series started to be called the Ryantsu series.
I think they called it that when they re-released the books, I think.
Later on, years later. We're talking, would you say probably 2 decades later? It started once the third volume came out?
Maybe 1 decade later. But
okay.
But I mean...
It was some time, because I remember those first 2 novels, they weren't known as the Ryantsu series.
But I mean, she called them the Ryantsu in the books, yes. But calling the whole series, right.
Because that's what the Romulans refer to themselves. The Romulans don't view themselves as Romulans. That's the Federation basic name for them.
Yeah, we call them Romulans because the humans, because Romulus is a word from Earth history.
Correct. And that's interesting that this whole series goes into that they find it offensive, that they find parallels to Roman history and parallel it to the Romulans.
Yes. Yeah, the Romulans don't take as much to human history.
That's right. So that ends up being, it started as being a one-shot book, developed into a...
There were 5 books
series
in all.
Total.
Yeah.
So is that something that you and your partner Jen are in the latest Trek library segment? Are you thinking about doing that down the road? Because
we haven't discussed it, but we both enjoy those books.
We love them. When we read them together with the Klingon Assault Group reading group.
Yeah, see, we covered them on the Klingon Assault Group podcast, Bound by Honor, all 5 of the books, and I mean, it was just a great experience.
Yeah. So that's something that we have to consider down the road. There is a plethora. There's more information on Romulans non-canon than there is canon when we think about the TOS era.
Well, yeah, because they were seen so little on canon, but they're so fascinating that people wanted to know more about them.
Absolutely. So let's go into some of the comic books. The first one we're going to discuss is Star Trek Alien Spotlight, Romulans by John Byrne. Now, comic book fans the world over know the name John Byrne.
My favorite by John Byrne was his reboot of Superman After Crisis.
Well, which was amazing. That miniseries, and they continued the regular series. Longtime fan of his from early X-Men, when he teamed up with Chris
he's done
Claremont.
A lot of stuff, hasn't he?
He's drawn just about everything. I mean, when you think about the big 2 of the 1980s, when it comes to comic book artists, writers that could do both very well. John Byrne, and who else?
George Perez. Another one of my favorites, yeah.
Without a doubt. And so knowing that John Byrne is a Star Trek fan, and he wanted to make this Star Trek series, makes it even more exciting, because he knows his Trek. Anytime you have a creator that knows the source material, you know that it's going to be true and not veer off so much. So this Alien Spotlight Romulans, what did you think about this one-shot comic?
This one was a very interesting story.
The artwork was dynamic.
Yeah, now the Praetor in this, so he's this skinny little guy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's a few inches shorter than the other Romulans, so, like he was never a soldier. I mean, he was just funny looking, I just thought. Like a little troll-like person.
Mm-hmm. I love the fact that it gives us some background. This takes place just before Balance of Terror.
Right, the prequel to Balance of Terror, which was, like, awesome to read. I mean, like, oh, I didn't know that existed. Look, it's great. Yeah, you got to see it.
And remember we were saying when we're watching Balance of Terror how different the Romulan Bird of Prey ship was compared to the Enterprise, because the Enterprise bridge was so spacious, but the Romulan Bird of Prey was so limited in space. And this addresses that issue, that the earlier ships were much larger, but this new stealth ship would be much smaller and compact.
And it makes sense for a stealth ship.
Mm-hmm.
And probably because it had the cloaking device, and so they needed a smaller ship to be able to cloak the whole thing.
And this was all new technology that was being developed during this time period for this ship.
So it says they actually got the technology from the Klingons.
Yes. Now that is the interesting twist. We know that down the road in the original series, we're going to see Romulans use Klingon ships, and that's more of a production issue, because they didn't have the physical Romulan Bird of Prey anymore in the third season to use it, so they had to use Klingon ships and say that there was an alliance between the Klingons and the Romulans.
They tried to explain it. They just said the Romulans are now using Klingon design.
But this goes into it further.
This says the Klingons actually developed the technology themselves and shared it with the Romulans.
Mm-hmm.
Which I didn't really like that part of it. I would rather think the Romulans developed it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an interesting twist.
It was. And they gave us some background into Mark Leonard's character. We didn't get a name still.
Right. Even though he's in this so much. So he's there. We find out he has a family. He's got a wife and son.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a great story. The way the way his character is developed, we find out he doesn't always get along with his son. Well, I mean, typical parent-child relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But it was very interesting to read.
But his son was being groomed to be in the military as well.
Yes, he wanted to. He wanted to be a soldier like his father. He wanted to serve on the same ship as his father, but then that caused a rift because the commander knew that his ship would probably be destroyed. So, and he didn't tell his son that, but he said he didn't want his son serving on his ship.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you get the trade paperback version, it's called John Byrne's Star Trek Romulans Pawns of War. There is an additional story that won the single versions, and it's a short story of Balance of Terror, but strictly from the Romulans' point of view. What did you think about that story?
I like that. I like that they did it. And the thing is, because like the James Blish adaptation left out all the parts on the Romulan ship.
And this fills it in.
This is a great companion to that. Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
totally.
and it's pretty much exactly the same as all the scenes on the Romulan ship. I think they added a few lines, but most of it was exactly the same.
And then we're going to bounce over to another IDW Alien Spotlight. This is Romulans. That is written by Ian Edgington with art by Wagner Reese. Totally different storyline. Totally different style of art. What did you think about it?
I thought the story was a good read because it had a lot of twists, unexpected story twists, just like you would expect with a Romulan story. you have the commander, and he is going from being a Romulan commander to being a senator. And so, and Romulans have always had this thing where we know that they have the soldiers and their politicians.
Mm-hmm.
And the commander is deciding on his best speech, and then they decide to send him on one last mission, which is really just a send-off for a ship. It wasn't even supposed to be a mission. It was a demonstration.
Mm-hmm.
But then it turned into something else. It actually turned into a fight where he would be killed. So I thought it was an interesting twist. Now I will say about the artwork in it, it was funny. I've never seen Romulans that look like this. They look like superheroes in spandex.
It's very much that that early 90s, mid 90s art style that was everywhere. You couldn't get away from it.
It's like, ooh, look at that, the male muscles. Look at that. I mean, the tight costumes and everything. I feel like I'm reading an Image comic.
It's very much so like that. You could tell there's that Rob Liefeld influence there. To me, that's just too distracting.
Yeah, you could say it is. I admit that part because we've never seen Romulans look like this, and I don't think it's realistic for them to really look like that either and to dress like that.
But we got to keep it part of the collection. And another 2-part series that's worthy of reading that kind of, I would say, is if we were to read the John Byrne Alien Spotlight and then wrap it up, watch the show, Balance of Terror, and then wrap it up with this series, a 2-part series called The Hollow Crown. Again, by IDW Comics.
Yeah, it was a great continuation of learning more about the Romulans.
And we're picking up where John Byrne's Alien Spotlight left off because we're seeing a lot of the same characters. The Praetor, Mark Leonard's
the
son.
Yeah, yes.
I don't know what else to call him. I call him Mark Leonard.
The Romulan commander's son.
Right?
Yeah, there's more than one Romulan commander, so you would have to say, like the male Romulan commander?
I'm hoping these stories would give him a name, but we still don't know his name.
That adds some mystique to the character. I think they just wanted to keep that, which is cool, really. Yeah, I think it's neat that they didn't give him a name.
See, I wish they would, because remember in the books, established Nyota Uhura, even though that wasn't canon until years later, us fans still referred to it as Nyota.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, they gave first names to the characters where we only knew their last names. Yes.
So that's my gripe with some of this material, is that I want to know their names, because we did get a non-canon name with the female Romulan commander.
Yeah, well, there were so many novels about her, and
yes.
they gave her different names, and I think the one that seems to have stuck is Charvanek. Because
by far, that's the one.
Star
that
Trek
stuck.
Continues used that one.
Yes, and even the HeroClix game used Charvanek.
Okay,
so
but it still isn't canon.
Mm-hmm.
But in fandom, that's pretty much her established name now.
But still, we have none for Mark Leonard Romulan. But we got to see more of the alliance with the Klingons.
We got to see Kor and Koloth, and Koloth is the one that had the whole plan about doing this little fake alliance with the Romulans, and Kor went along with it. But Kor seems to be the one who's actually over Koloth in this story, which I never would have thought.
Yes, and he's always. It looks like he's goofing on Koloth.
Yeah,
Koloth is playing games too. He's kind of weaseling his way in bed with...
Well, with the Emperor's daughter.
Yes.
So the Klingons are conniving too, just like the Romulans in this story. I mean,
what'd you think about it?
It was a good story. I mean, I did like it.
Very much so. And
the continuation of the Romulan family. So the commander's son grew up, got married, and he has this like vendetta against Captain Kirk.
Yes.
And he was made to believe that Kirk actually killed his father, and the Klingons manipulated him. They played him a recording that showed Kirk, saying all these mean things to his father and killing him, which isn't the way it happened.
The last words of Kirk to Mark Leonard were not of, hey, let's beam the survivors over here, we're here to help you, but they were words of vengeance, which are very unlike Captain Kirk.
Yes, and so now we've got the son thinking, all of these mean things about Kirk, and every time they happen to run into a Starfleet ship, he goes, "Is it the Enterprise?" Mm-hmm. And it never is in this story, which is ironic.
But what do you think about these reads? I loved it. I love reading these comics right after the show. It tied everything up perfectly.
It's a sequel to the show, and it's something unexpected. I mean, it's well written and enjoyable, and it continues on too. So you find out what happens. Well, basically, the son. Okay, so the son dies, right, and then his wife is the one who declares that there will no longer be an alliance with the Klingons. It was pretty cool.
But I think the best part of it is showing us the background of how the Romulans and the Klingons made an alliance.
Yes, they explained why the Klingons did it. And it was, I think the way they did it it flowed well. I mean, it fits in well with the Star Trek universe.
Yes, and it continued to show that even though they formed an alliance, they really did not like each other. The Romulans viewed the Klingons as very crude and brash. When the Klingons were around the Romulans, they did not respect their ways. And that's very much like what we get out of TOS Klingons.
Yeah, it's still the way they're portrayed now. I mean, they never liked each other. They never were really friends, even when they had an alliance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well done.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.